Hi friends, welcome to See the Light Art Projects. This is the project Dreams of Joseph, and this is lesson 2. So if you haven't had a chance to view lesson 1, do that first. It'll introduce our project and help you get started before we move into the amazing world of color. We're going to be talking about Marc Chagall, the famous Russian Jewish artist, and his dreamlike paintings. He was quite a prolific painter. That means he painted quite a lot of work over the time of his life, and he always had the same kind of features about his work. You can recognize a Chagall, and I'm really hoping that by the time you're finished with this art project DVD, you'll be able to recognize a Marc Chagall as well. Well, for Dreams of Joseph, there's some supplies you're going to need. It's not only for today, but for the remaining 3 lessons. You're going to need some brushes, both some flat brushes, no more than 1/2 or 3/4 of an inch, and some round brushes, and I would get several sizes, some medium and some small. You're going to need paper plates that we're going to use as palettes, and our main material that we're going to be using for the remainder of the 3 lessons are small bottles of craft paint, and these you can get in any craft or art supply store. They're a little more liquid than, say, an acrylic paint, and they're a little more rich color and have a little sheen to them as opposed to tempera paint. Now, if all you have handy is tempera paint, that's fine. It just dries a little duller than craft paint, but you can get a lot of great vibrant colors with craft paint. Now, what colors to get? Well, you're going to have what I call the basic 9. And so on one paper plate, we're going to have our first set, and those are our warm colors. And that would be yellow, red, and orange. Those are your warm colors. On another paper plate, you're going to need your cool colors, and that would be violet or purple, green, and blue. And on another paper plate, your neutrals, which would be black, which you see I already have there, white, and brown. So to get yourself started, we're going to need to squirt out onto each of the paper plates. But here's what I would recommend. Don't squirt out too much. You don't know how much you're going to use. So to start, I would say you're going to put your colors on the outside rim of your paper plate. I would say no larger than a coin, like a quarter. If you need more, you can always get more. But I really don't want you to waste paint. Now, I happen to know we're going to be using a little bit more green today, so there are my cool colors. I'm going to do my warm colors. There's an orange. There's a yellow. And on my warm colors plate, I'm going to add just one small puddle of white, because I know I'm going to be doing some mixing. See, like that. So there's my warm palette, there's my cool palette, and then this is my neutral palette. I already have black there. So there's a small puddle of white, and I need a small puddle of brown. Now, once you get used to painting more and more, you might set up your palettes differently. You might want to put your primary colors on one palette and secondary on another. It's really however you like to work. But for starting artists, this is what I recommend: warm, cool, and neutral. So you should also have your painting from the last time, and handy things to clean your brushes, such as a bowl of water and some paper towels or napkins. Now, if you're near a sink, that's even better, because then you can really clean your brushes. But not everybody paints near a sink, and so a bowl of water is fine. So Marc Chagall was a very devout Jewish man, and he loved living in his Jewish community of Vitebsk in Russia. And because his faith was so important to him, I think it's only appropriate that we do something from the Bible as our subject matter for this painting in the style of Marc Chagall. And because most of the paintings of Chagall are referred to as being very dreamlike, it makes sense that we take a dream sequence from the Bible. Now, dreams are actually used quite a lot in the Bible. It's a way that God speaks to us and to the people He's chosen to work through. It's like He's talking directly to them through dreams. So the dream that we're doing is Joseph in the Old Testament, the first two dreams that he shares in the story in Genesis, when he's still at home with his older brothers and his father. The dream of when the sheaf of grain stood upright while 11 bowed down, and that the sun and the moon and 11 stars bowed down to Joseph as well. So we have our basic outline, and now we have our colors, and we're ready to add in our color. And that's something I want you to remember, that Chagall loved color. In fact, he really felt that it was a gift from God to see the world in such vivid color. And he even remarked on this in his autobiography. So to get started, whenever you're painting, friends, you always want to work from large areas to small, and from general to specific. And so the biggest areas that we have is the sky and the hills. And so that's what we're going to work in first. Now, I know we've already drawn in an outline, and so we are going to be going around it, and I don't want you to worry and get too crazy about being fussy around these shapes, because in the fourth lesson, we're going to come back with the black to reinforce. So take the largest brush you have. Remember, though, it should really be no larger than about a ½ inch or so, because you have to get around some things. And to get started, let's work on the hills. So I'm going to use a green. Now, the real green grass of hills probably doesn't look like the straight green right out of a bottle, but we're working in a dreamlike sequence and with a lot of bright color, like Chagall. So it's okay to take the green straight from the bottle. So I'm going to wet my brush to start, and I'm going to load my brush, turning on both sides, and I'm just going to get started in this large area to the right where my sheep are, and I'm going to paint away from the black lines. In other words, start my brush at a black line and pull to stroke down. Now you can see I'm getting some paint on the table. That's another reason we like to have the paper towel handy. The great thing about craft paint is it's water soluble. But if you want to work over newspaper to protect a table, you can do that. Now I'm using the green straight, and I'm also, it looks like I'm rushing. I'm not rushing, I'm just working quickly, and there's a reason why, and I'll explain in a minute. And if I want to get finer detail or more control of my brush, I hold it more upright so I can't put a lot of pressure on it. And I'm going around these little sheep shapes. I'm not too worried about how much I cover of that black, because I'm going to be able to come back. And I'm keeping the edge of this flat brush up against this black paint line. Around this foot. This is still the right-hand hill. Go around this little sheep guy here. And I'm still using the same shade of green. But we know that as you look at something in the distance, and we know that this is somewhat in the distance because the sheep are a little smaller, although Chagall often mixed up scale, things that were either way too large or way too small, all part of his dreaminess. So there's that hill, but we know that a hill looks different. The color of the grass would look different as it moves away from you. So I want to kind of change the color of that grass up there to be a little bit lighter and duller as it recedes away from me. Color is not as intense or bright when it recedes away from you. It's more intense as it's closer, but it also gets lighter. So to do that, friends, scoop up a little bit of your green on your brush, put it in the center of your plate. Then, with another brush, keep that one handy, with another brush, take a little bit of yellow, lay it next to the green, and just a little bit of brown lay it next to there. And because we want to go lighter, I'm going to scoop up just a little bit of white from my neutral. Now I'm going to mix these together to make a new shade of green. Now why did I take brown? Because I want to dull it down a little. Why did I take white? I want to lighten it up a little. And you can see it's a totally different shade of green from this one here. And while this is still a little wet, I'm going to stroke in this other shade of green as the hill moves away, which means it's that top black line that we drew. This is called wet in wet. While the paint is still wet, I'm dragging in another color. And so there's some blending going on right on the board. So it's a totally different shade of green blended in with the one that came right from the bottle. So now I'm going to start under the sheaves. Again, up to the black line. I'm not worried about how accurately I'm going around the sheaves. We're going to be able to come back at a later time. I'm just kind of going in between like this. Under the robe, around the sock foot, and let that black line show where the two hills meet. Now, especially up against this hill, I want to keep that new color that I made. But as I come away, as I go over here, I'm going to bring in more and more of the right from the bottle green because it's coming closer, and so it's going to be brighter. So now, more of that right from the bottle green. You can see I'm kind of working quickly. Anytime you work with water-based paint, which is what this craft paint is, it dries fast. Now here in the studio it's drying really fast because of the lights. And since I want to do some wet in wet technique, I don't want it to dry quite that fast. So I'm going around the black. It's okay if you cover up some of the black. Totally fine. We're going to come back. And adding in some of that right from the bottle green. There we go. Now underneath where Joseph is kind of floating would cast some type of shadow, even if he's floating way above this dreamy field. And so while it's still wet, I'm going to, with the same brush, even though there's green on the brush, I'm going to dip into some brown, just a tiny bit on the end. That's called double loading the brush. There's still green on there, but I've got brown. And underneath there, I'm going to stroke, mixing in some brown with the green, to cast some shadow there, just a little bit. So I have the green and the brown mixing in, just cast a little bit of shadow there. Same thing, you're double loading the brush, so you have the green, just the very end of the brush, just a little bit of the brown underneath those standing sheaves right there. Pretty colorful green though, and I like seeing a lot of different greens. Now, if you want to add more white or more yellow to get a shade of green that you like, that's perfectly great. You're the artist, you decide. I just want you to interpret these dreams as very colorful because that's how Marc Chagall did it, okay? Now, what's the next step? I bet you can guess. The blue of the sky. But first, friends, very important to clean your brushes. So, a word about cleaning brushes. I used a couple brushes here. I'm swishing them around in the water. I'm pressing into the bottom of the bowl. I'm using that to kind of scrub against the brush. Take it out every once in a while to check. Turn it. But it's not enough to just do that. You must check that all the pigment of prior paint is out. And the only way you can do that is with the paper towel or a napkin. And so what I do is I have my napkin or my paper towel. I brushed out and pressed against the bristles against the bottom of the wet bowl. And then I take and I squeeze so that the brush is between two sides of the napkin. Press hard, and only if when you open it up is it clear, then you know all the pigment is out. Okay? Let's try it again with this other brush. I use this one for a lot of green. So again, I'm swishing in the water. I'm pressing my bristles against the bottom of the bowl, back and forth, back and forth. And now I'm going to squeeze it between the paper towel. But I can see green came out of my paper towel, which means there's still pigment left in my brush. So you're going to repeat this process until you know that the brush is clean. Now friends, if you're near a sink where you can rinse it under a sink, that's even better, because then the running water keeps that water nice and clean going over your brush. And now it's clean. Okay, so the next part is the blue. And I need to talk to you about blue, because blue was Chagall's favorite color. In fact, take a look at this painting by Chagall. It's called The Circus. And you'll see how blue really dominates. It's outlined in blue, all the essential figures. The circus ring is blue. The high wire act is blue. So he really loved blue. In fact, if you look at the whole body of work of Chagall, that medium, rich cerulean blue is the predominant color in most of his paintings. He's known for it. So if you want to use blue straight out of the bottle, that's great. It's not a pale baby blue. It's not really light. It's kind of that medium, middle of the road, bright cerulean blue. And that's really the blue that you want. Okay, so we're going to start off with blue straight from the bottle, but we're going to be using the wet in wet technique. So what I'd like you to do is, wherever you have your blue on your palette, I'd like you to take just a tiny little bit, not a lot, of black. Just a tiny bit. So now I have my brush, again my bigger brush because I'm doing a large area, and I'm going to use this blue straight from the bottle. And we're going to start at the top of our picture, and I'm going to work actually fairly quickly because I want to work wet in wet at some later spots. So I'm going to go around my outlined items of my moon and my sun, and I'll keep loading my brush whenever I need it. I love that intense blue. It is a great color. It might be a little tricky going around the stars, but just like when we were around the sheaves of grain, you don't get too wrapped up in, oh no, I lost some of the black lines. That is okay, because we are going to come back. You just want to have a general idea and bring it up as best you can around those stars. This is when a flat brush really helps you, because you get that flat edge. Now, if you'd like to work on your own, because you are more meticulous or take your time more than I do, then you can pause the DVD and you can come back. I'm just going kind of around the hair, along this robe. Now you don't want to leave any gaps. In other words, you want to make sure your blue, or really any color, green, whatever, comes right up against the black. Try not to leave any of the board that you're painting on show through. You can always correct it later, but it's so much easier if you just get it right the first time. Take it all the way out to the edge. Mine is drying quickly. Now what we want to do, friends, is that wet on wet technique again in two spots. One is around Joseph, because Chagall would often highlight or create focus on a figure by making almost like a halo around them in white. or a lighter shade. So as I'm going to go around Joseph, this is his face here, I have this gorgeous blue that Chagall loved, but I want to create some focus around Joseph. He would do that around central figures. So while this is still wet, which is why I'm not going on to finish other areas, while this is still wet, I'm going to dip in my blue, then I'm going to dip just the end of the brush in some white, like that. This is called double loading. So I have two colors on the brush, and while the paint is still wet, I'm going to stroke away from Joseph like this. I start by Joseph and I pull away. It's like creating a halo effect. And Chagall would often, turn your brush over to load more white, he would often create a focal point by making an area around a key figure very light. And you see I double loaded, so I'm doing the mixing right on the board rather than on my palette. So I'm stroking away, creating this halo effect around Joseph. Now I'm going to go back and finish this blue, getting in, make sure you get in all these little spots like underneath the arms, right up to that black line. Perfect. Good. Now your painting might already look different than your neighbor's or mine, and that is great. And I can't wait till we get to the next part where we add in all the color on the robe, because then everyone's is totally unique. And that's the part I love. And once you get large areas like this done, such as the hills and the sky, you can see the difference already. I'm not going to go inside there because that's this sheaf of grain. That's going to be a golden color. I'm going to go around that hand there, but I'm going to go at the top because the grain is standing up like that. And now I just have to get around these stars. And again, I'm not going to get too worried since we are going to come back and do the stars in a minute. And that's how we'll finish up today with what's in the heavens. Now you might be saying, Miss Pat, why did you have us put black on the palette? Well, I'm going to show you now. So I'm doing this straight out of the bottle blue. In fact, I'm going to need some more because I'm running out. So you can refill your paint as you need it. That's why I say don't put too much paint on your palette. I just don't want you to waste. But you can always refill. So now, at the top of your painting, and this is a phenomenon in the sky where the sky gets lighter as it moves to the horizon. But we don't want to add white and make it lighter to the horizon because we already added white to highlight Joseph's face, right? So we're going to do the opposite. We're going to make it darker as it's away from the horizon. And the way we're going to do that, I have all of the straight out of the bottle blue here. And I'm rebrushing because mine just dries really fast in this light. So I have this straight out of the bottle blue, which is beautiful. But now I'm going to load my brush. I'm going to double load, but with a little bit of black. But here's a caution, my friends. Both white and black are very strong in terms of pigment, what they do. White added to a pigment creates a tint, and black added to a pigment creates a shade. And you don't need a lot. A little goes a long way. So the very, very end of my brush, just the slightest bit of black, not very much at all. And then right in here, wet on wet technique, I'm stroking down to pull that darker value, because light and dark is a value, down into the blue. Just at the very top. And so that double loading, the color mixes as you're brushing right into the board. Great. Now I'm going to put this in the water. I'm going to clean that later because I'm going to use a different brush for the sun and the moon. We're ready to do these heavenly things. So now that we've finished the main part of the sky, I realize that I want a lighter yellow there. Now we're going to do the heavenly elements, and these should be actually pretty quick. We're going to do the sun, just a circle in yellow. I'm not real thrilled with that yellow, so I'm going to mix up kind of my own yellow here, which is what you can do. That's why you have the center of the paper plate, so that you can mix up a color that you like. Fairly fast. And then with another brush, let's do the moon, crescent moon in white. Now, even if you have a white board that you're on, still paint it white, because you might want to have those paint strokes so it matches the rest of your painting, and you might even want to add in like a little touches, again with the wet on wet. See how I'm adding in a little bit of goldish yellow into the white? You can't do it if you're just going to rely on the white of your board. And then the last step is the stars. Now, it's your choice if you want to make them yellow stars or white stars. How do you see stars? So I think I'm going to make mine yellow. I just love the balance it will provide to the sheaves of grain that are going to be gold. And so I want to stay with a lighter yellow, I think. So I'm going to scoop up as much of this nice light yellow. And maybe even lighten it up a little more, add in some more white. So here's the color that I'm mixing right here. You push the paint in towards the center, like push paint that you've gathered from the sides, so that it becomes a big creamy puddle in the center. Now these are kind of small, so take the size brush that you will work for you. I'm looking at my brush here and I'm realizing that's probably a little too big. So I'm going to get my smaller brush, just kind of scoop that paint off of there. I want to use it, don't want to waste. I'll wash that in a minute. And with my smaller brush, I'm going to use that light yellow, and I'm going to paint the stars. And you notice I'm not worried about the black lines where they crossed over. This is part of our dream sequence here of Joseph, and a very important part of his dream, where he dreamt that the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to him. You know, whenever I hear, my friends, of the sun and the moon and stars, and I think about how when I look up in the sky, I don't know about you, but I'm in awe of what God does in the sky. Comets and asteroids and galaxies, that's the universe. Wow, it's pretty incredible. Well, here's the thing. I know that Chagall was awed by the universe too. He had a great relationship with God and was so grateful for all of his creation and all the color he provided. He painted the symbols of the sun and the moon quite a lot in his paintings. In fact, if you look at Eye in the Village, you'll see in this lower area we have a crescent moon and the sun to represent the night and the day of how life just keeps going in the village, night and day, of their life there together in community. It really reminds me of that verse in the Psalms when I look up at the heavens. While you're painting, I'm going to read it to you. This is from Psalm 8, verses 3 and 4. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them, and human beings that you care for them? That's a great thought. God, who created this amazing, immense universe, still cares about each individual person on this planet. In fact, he cares about the hairs on their head. He can count them. And he knows us all so perfectly. Isn't that an awesome thought? The creator of something as big as the universe knows each one of us. He knows us before we were born. That is an incredible promise. So now that I've painted the sun and the moon and the stars, there's one last thing that I want to do, very similar to what we did around Joseph, and that's the halo effect around the sun. So take a bigger brush. Now this one was in white, so I'm not too worried about cleaning it because I'm going right back to white. And we're just going to take a little bit of white, just a little bit of white on the very end of the brush. And then I want you to kind of dab it off a little bit onto the paper towel. So there's not a lot of paint. It should be very dry, not a lot of paint. And around this, onto the blue, around the sun, holding the brush upright, it's a very dry brush. We're creating a halo effect. But it's a very dry brush. There should not be a lot of paint on there, like nothing can drip. And this would happen frequently in Chagall's work. He would put this halo effect around there. You can see that, that's very dry. Okay. Take a look at this painting by Chagall called Blue Violinist. Now, I told you already about the tradition in the Jewish community of a violinist being at every major event. Well, this is Blue Violinist, and look at the way he treated the moon in that painting. And of course, blue being the predominant color, which we've already learned, Chagall loved that beautiful, rich, medium blue. So, you'll also notice there's a floating figure, and of course we have our Joseph who's a floating figure because we're in this dreamlike state, and the painting kind of represents what's happening. Joseph is dreaming. And that is obvious in Blue Violinist. There was a floating figure, very colorful, a haloed moon. There's always some type of moon or sun or stars in Chagall's work. And so we're following in that tradition in order to make our dreams of Joseph, the great story from the Old Testament of Joseph, who had a lot of dreams, and those dreams at first got him into trouble, like in the beginning of the story, but then they are his salvation at the end of the story. So I'll see you next time for Lesson 3 when we continue in color for our dreams of Joseph.